Hi there, esteemed audience, and welcome to another episode of Middle Grade Ninja. I'm your host, Rob Kent. As you know, I'm the author of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees, the first in the Banneker Bones trilogy, the story of two 11-year-old genius detectives who do battle with giant robot bees across the Latimer City sky with EMP blast rifles, which is the weapon of choice if you must fight a giant robot bee. The sequel, Banneker Bones and the Alligator People, they fight, you guessed it, the Alligator People. And in book three, Banneker Bones and the Cyborg Conspiracy, they're up against a cyborg conspiracy. It's a very exciting time. If you're curious about the series, you can get Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees as an audiobook, a paperback, or the ebook is free. Free to download whenever you're watching or listening to this, wherever fine ebooks are sold. So check that out if you're interested in something a little bit more adult. Under the super secret pen name Robert Kent, I write horror novels such as my young adult novel, All Together Now, a Zombie Story, or The Book of David, which is a 5-volume serial horror novel about an atheist who purchases a haunted house that then begins to give him religious visions involving flying saucers. It is crazy. It goes on for 5 volumes. Wherever you think the story is going to go, there's no way to guess because at the end of every chapter, I intentionally flip the script and change things further until Jesus himself is a character in this story. It is absolutely bonkers. If you're curious about that, you can get the Book of David, Chapter 1, the first of 5 volumes as a paperback, where the ebook is free to download whenever you're watching or listening to this, wherever fine ebooks are sold. Or if you go back in the catalog of the show, about I think maybe 10, 15 episodes, it's been crazy during quarantine. However many episodes ago it was, I recorded an ebook of that first chapter. You can listen to me read it to you. You don't even have to switch from the device you're listening to this on. You can enjoy all of chapter one. And then once you're hooked, well, you'll be reading chapter 2, 3, 4, and 5. I'm not reading the ones that I charge you for free. But by God, you can hear me read chapter 1. And as always, for interviews with hundreds, almost thousands of literary agents, editors, authors, publishing professionals, folks you'd be interested in, you can check out the archive of those written interviews as well as all of the past episodes of this show and find out about what's coming up with the next show at middlegradeninja.com. Go there. It's really the only website you'll ever need to visit for the rest of your life. And that is plenty. It's too much, really. My guest tonight is MarcyKate Connolly, who I couldn't be more thrilled to talk to. MarcyKate, how are you?
I'm great, thanks. Thanks for having me on. Excited to be here.
Oh, I am excited to have you here. Probably the best place to start is I always say I don't do other people's bios and I never describe somebody else's book because I will make a mess of both. So if you would just give a esteemed audience kind of an overview of your background.
Sure. I'm a middle grade and young adult author. I live in the Boston area, and I have a day job as a marketing nonprofit professional in addition to my book writing. And I have a grumble of pugs, which people always like to talk about because pugs are the best. And I love writing fantasy novels. Fantasy is my jam. I love writing weird little books. That's what I call them. So that's my little about me. I write weird books. That's kind of my brand.
So, and we're going to talk because there's I was enjoyed the audiobook for Monstrous, and weird is absolutely the correct word, but so much fun. And I love the covers that look like Tim Burton stopped by to help design them. It's beautiful.
Oh my goodness, yeah, those covers. I've been blessed by the cover gods in pretty much all of my covers, but like the Monstrous ones, and I will hold this up because I happen to have it next to me. This was Scotty Young who did this. He does actual comics. Like he's like a real deal. And the Ravenous is the companion novel. I was blown away by those covers. That was my first book was Monstrous, and that was like hit the jackpot with the cover gods in that one. That's for sure.
For anyone who is nostalgic for what was it, the melancholy death of Oyster Boy and other tales by Tim Burton, the illustrations from that book would be right at home, I think. with the covers.
I'm not familiar with that one, but that's fascinating. I'll have to look that up.
I assure you, it's the highest praise I have to give. It's one of my favorite books of art and poetry.
Nice. That's awesome. That's very cool.
So when did you know that you were destined to one day write weird middle grade? I think you said was it creepy weird? Weird.
Weird, definitely always weird. Sometimes more creepy than others. My middle grade tends to be pretty much creepy. My upcoming young adult book, Twin Daggers, which I'll plug here as well, is not so much creepy, but definitely kind of on the weird, darker type side.
And Twin Daggers is available August 25th.
Yes, August 25th.
I bet it's available for pre-order right now, isn't it?
Absolutely is. Thank you. And it's basically it's a fantasy spin on Romeo and Juliet. If Juliet and her twin sister were magic-wielding spies, and it's set in this world where of magic versus machines. The spies are the magi. They're this magic users who've been almost entirely wiped out in a war 100 years ago, and the technocrats are the people who are in control of the country now, and they think the magi are more or less a myth. But the twin spies are infiltrating the city to take down the technocrats. They have to find an heir who does not have a heart. The heir has a machine for a heart instead. It's part of this curse that the magi sent to the technocrats as their last gasp in the battle. So it was really fun to write, and I love classics. So it was really fun to put a new spin, kind of a feminist twist on Romeo and Juliet as well. But to answer your question that you asked, when did I discover I wanted to be a writer? It took me a lot longer to figure that out than it should have. When I was growing up, I loved reading. That was the most formative thing for me was reading, especially dark books. I loved the Grimm's fairy tales. The Disney fairy tales are also really enjoyable, but the Grimm ones that were dark and weird and kind of creepy, I loved those. My parents had this whole volume of the mythology and fairy tales, 12-volume thing, and it was my mom's when she was a little girl. So it was a little old back then, and you open up the pages and had these old-timey drawings on it, and it had the smell of an old book, and it just transported you to another world. It's amazing. And I would sit on the couch and read these things, and it definitely heavily influenced my work. Also a big influence eventually was my older brother. I have an older brother and sister who are about 9 and 10 years older than me. So my brother was in college getting his degree in English literature. I was 8. And I was the bratty little sister who would go into his room and pull his books off his shelves. So I was reading things that were totally inappropriate for an 8 and 9-year-old to be reading. I read A Midsummer Night's Dream when I was 8 or 9, and because I thought, oh, fairies, how cool, and everything else went way over my head, thank God. But I read a lot of Poe and Shakespeare and all sorts of things that were just really not age appropriate, but I enjoyed them and I read them because I was a very good reader. A lot of it went over my head, obviously. So I knew I loved to read at that point in time, and books were very much of an escape for me growing up. I was not a popular child, that's for sure. I was bullied by this group of girls in 4th and 5th grade who every day at recess would follow me around and tell me I was fat and ugly, every day. It was awful. They were not very nice. But me and my best friends... Now
they've all been remade as villains in your work ever since.
I'll never tell. But me and my best friends, we were obsessed with this one particular series of books, the Redwall series by Brian. It's either Jakes or Jocks. I'm not actually sure because I've never heard it said out loud by anybody other than myself. But Brian, I always say Brian Jocks.
Smart people say Jocks, but I'm suspicious because I've also heard smart people overpronounce things.
Exactly. And I have a habit of overpronouncing things. So I'm saying Jocks because that's what it looks like to me, but I could totally be wrong. Anyway, Redwall, fabulous series, anthropomorphic mice and other assorted woodland creatures on these fantasy adventures. When I back in the day, there was 3 of them, which totally dates me. And now it's 30 or something. But we loved this series of books. We were obsessed with them. We would read them together, and it was transporting ourselves into another world. What we would do is on the playground, we would actually take on personas of our favorite characters or make up new characters in the fantasy world and go on like missions. So we'd be like hiding from the bullies on the playground. So it was both literal and a figurative escape for me. And that was it was such a formative thing. I liked to write at that time. Yeah, it still didn't occur to me to be a writer. But I enjoyed writing. I actually found, I wish I had it with me. I have it somewhere, but I don't know where it is right now. I found my 4th grade writing portfolio when I was cleaning out my parents' house about a year ago, and it had 3 pieces in it that are like so on brand for me. It's hilarious. And I got an A, I have to say. I have to preface to say I got an A in this portfolio. I would probably get a concern note sent home if I sent it in now as a 4th grader. It had 3 pieces. The first one was a story about a girl who gets abducted by aliens, because I was completely and totally obsessed with aliens growing up. I had like binoculars around my neck all the time. I was looking at the sky constantly. I was that kid. I was a little strange. That's okay. Then the next piece was my last will and testament. I left my silver to my sister and my gold to my mother. Not that I had any of those things, but I left them to them. And then the third piece was called The Seal's Revenge. And I actually illustrated this. I made this cover of the seal and this like happy title that says The Seal's Revenge in like rainbow lettering. And there's a narwhal on the cover and the seal and like 2 seals. And I think the narwhal's horn is like dripping a little bit of blood. And the story was about the seal who wants to get revenge on this narwhal because the narwhal has killed his mate. And he manages to kill the narwhal. And then, in a shocking twist ending, the narwhal's mate comes up behind the seal and skewers him. So, like, everybody dies. Like, this is around the time I first read Hamlet as well, which is clearly a very big influence on the story. But I love the part that had this like happy rainbow lettering in the title, and then like everybody dies. So I still didn't know I wanted to be a writer, but I really enjoyed it and had fun doing it. I wanted to be everything else. I wanted to be a poet for a while. I wrote lots of poetry, like ripping off Emily Dickinson. I wanted to be president for a brief amount of time, and then became very disillusioned with that. And then I want to be an archionologist.
We couldn't do worse. You could.
I don't want the stress. You kidding? My God. I wanted to be a farmer who lived in a motorhome and had animals attached to the back and like drove around the country. I had very creative ideas of things I wanted to be that were just very ridiculous. Writer was never one of them, and I don't know why. In high school, I was still not a popular child. But I had turned to a love of music as well as reading. And I am a classically trained soprano. However, I have crippling stage fright. Won't be singing. So it's not well. Not well at all. So there was a time when I wanted to be like a Broadway star, and it became very apparent that was not going to happen by college. And by college, I started writing music because I really enjoyed singing opera and Broadway and that kind of a thing, but I was not going to be performing. Like, I would sing in the choir when, like, you can't tell it's me. If it's just me, doesn't go well. So I ended up going to Hampshire College out in Western Massachusetts, which is a magical place. It doesn't give you grades. They give you written evaluations instead. I was no longer the weirdest person in the room, so it was fantastic. And I got to make up my own major of a double major of the music and literature. And I ended up writing an opera as my essentially a senior thesis. And it was a sequel to Hamlet. And it was Hamlet's journey through the underworld. And I wrote the plot of what happened. I wrote the music, but I still did not occur to me that I could write those words. And it was looking back, like, it's so ridiculous. What I ended up doing was going through all of Shakespeare's plays, and after I devised the plot, and then pulling out all these lines and bits and pieces and passages that might relate to my plot in some way, and then Frankensteining them back together. So all the words were Shakespeare's, but not really the way he wrote them. So the subtitle was
fantastically weird and nerdy, and I love it. That's awesome.
It was like my geek flag was really flying pretty hard. So it was called The Undiscovered Country because it was Hamlet. And then the subtitle was Quilting with Shakespeare because of the words. So still didn't have this idea that I could write these words, but I could write the music. I don't know why I was not thinking that. But eventually, I then graduated and very quickly discovered that operas are not in high demand, especially from completely unknown composers, and had to figure out how am I going to pay off these crushing student loans. And eventually I began working in Boston. I was living in New Hampshire at the time. And I was working in Boston in an arts organization, so I could still be behind the scenes. That's actually my master's degree in is arts administration. So I do behind the scenes stuff. Though right now I'm at a literacy organization, but before I was at operas and theater companies and things like that. But I was commuting 2 hours each way from New Hampshire to Boston because of the whole driving to the train station, going into the train and commuting traffic, working a full-time job, and then going to school at night, taking these classes, and hurrying to get home and go back and do it all over again. And one night, I'm on the train. I don't know if you've ever been on the subway in Boston, but if you have, it's the oldest subway, I think. I think it is actually the oldest subway system in the country. And it shows, because sometimes those trains just kind of randomly stop between stops and just kind of hang out for a while they're waiting to get to, maybe it's a traffic up ahead, supposedly, but they're really just kind of chilling for a minute to catch their breath or something. And there's a lot of unused subway tunnels. And it was just one night where I'm totally exhausted, struggling to make that last train so I don't have to sleep in North Station overnight because that's awful. And I learned how to run in heels at this point in time. Running a train. Fun fact, could not do it now. Then I could in my 20s. And the train is stopped between these stops, and the gears are just, my mind's wandering, and I'm looking out the window, and all of a sudden I see this old unused subway tunnel, and there's a light on behind this plastic sheeting, and it's glowing in this weird way. I'm like, that's kind of cool. And I got this idea about fairies living in the subway tunnels of Boston. And I got home, and even though I should have just gone right to bed, I started writing a little bit about this character and this story world and what it would be like. And then I wrote some more, and I basically just completely fell in love with this. It was well, if I can write a 2-hour opera, maybe I can write a 300-page novel. And I did, and I kind of never looked back. That book was not published. Someday I'm going to rewrite it from scratch. But it was not published, and rightly so, as I did try very hard. But it had a lot of issues that need to be fixed. But it was a lot of fun. That's the kind of randomly convoluted way I got into writing was sort of by accident. I just got this wonderful burst of inspiration. It was I'm going to give this a shot, and it was fun. I loved it.
You're a less hateful J.K. Rowling on a train. getting a brilliant vision.
Yeah, I definitely don't have the hateful part. That's for sure.
Yes, unfortunately, regular esteemed audience viewers who watch the show on YouTube will note that the Harry Potter figurines that used to decorate the background have had to come down. You hate to see it.
Yeah.
So, okay, so at what point? So the first book, that brilliant, though undoubtedly it is.
Really
doesn't quite catch on the way you're hoping. So is it book number 2? How long from there to the point where when do you start submitting, and what's the path that gets us to Monsters?
So Monsters was actually the 7th book that I wrote and the first to be published.
So the path is long. All right.
The path is long. To be honest, the path is actually medium. It felt really long at the time. But I have friends who had a much longer path. And yeah, it felt really long, but it was about medium. So I wrote that first story, and I got some critique partners who were awesome. And actually, several of them are still my critique partners today when I have time to actually, I don't have a deadline, basically. Deadlines make critiquing with partners hard, unfortunately. But they're great, and they help me polish the book, and I help them polish their books and all of that. And then I queried agents, and I queried pretty much every single agent I could find. Plenty of smagents too, I'm sure. And I got some requests, and then they all came back as rejections. But during the meantime, I was writing another book. So I was like, this is really fun. I want to keep doing this. So I wrote a book about a ghost story about a girl who works at a haunted theater. Because at the time, I actually was the marketing director of a haunted theater, which was pretty fun.
Oh, we're coming back to that, but go on.
So I wrote a novel about that, and I tried querying that, and that didn't really get very far. It actually got less far than the first book. And then I tried my hand at writing a middle grade book and a couple other random books, and I queried three of them before I finally got to Monstrous. And the third one, it was 3. I'm like, sorry, counting my head like it was 3, right? I wrote 6 books before this, and I queried 3 of them. The other 3 are just safely tucked away and never to be seen. And the third one, before the 6th book I wrote, but the third one to be queried, came really close, we thought, my two partners and I, because I got lots of like agent interest in it, and it was a YA sci-fi cyborg road trip novel about this girl who accidentally discovers on prom night that she's a cyborg and goes on this cross-country road trip, and there's lots of mayhem, and it was so much fun to write, and it just wasn't working for agents. They like thought the query letter was so great, and then I would get like feedback, which is great when you're querying to start getting feedback. That's really encouraging and good. But I was getting feedback that was just like all over the place. Like I had one agent tell me she thought the pacing was too slow. Another thought the pacing was too fast. Another said the pacing was spot on, but she didn't like the way that the romance panned out. And it was just, wasn't something I could identify to fix, which was so frustrating and so discouraging, because I thought this was going to be the one, because I got a lot of requests, like a really high request rate compared to my other books. And they all end up coming back as no. And I kind of had to take this like step back and be like, why am I doing this to myself? Because over this period of several years, about 4 years or so, I'd garnered at least 300 rejections. I kind of stopped counting at that point because it was way too depressing. And I had to like say, okay, why am I doing this? This is like terrible to get this constant avalanche of rejection. It is not fun. And I ended up coming to 2 conclusions. One, that regardless of whether or not I got published, I was still going to keep writing because I really loved writing. It was really fun. I had a lot of stories in me to tell. And so that was not going to change. And then 2, I decided I was going to keep trying to get published, because if I stopped, I would always wonder what if, and that would really haunt me. And it would drive me nuts. So I was like, okay, I'll keep doing this. But first I'm going to write just something for me that's fun, and I'm not even going to bother querying it. I'm just going to write it and have fun with it and like recapture that joy of writing that I feel like I kind of started to lose a little bit. And this was around the time I got the idea for Monstrous. And I got that idea stranded in traffic during rush hour trying to get into Boston. There's a theme, Boston, in my ideas.
It's just amazing for you. You need to get on the road. You need to know how many places to go just for story ideas.
Right? Transportation in the shower are like when I get my best ideas. So I was on the road, and all of a sudden, I'm like literally in gridlock traffic, could not move if I even wanted to. And all of a sudden, the very first line of Monstrous just fell into my brain. And the very first line is, I will never forget my first breath, gasping, heaving, delicious. And I had to know, who would remember their first breath? What a bizarre thing to remember. How is that possible? And so I got this idea for this like kind of Franken girl who's been reborn and recreated rather by her father to get revenge on this wizard. And that's how she remembers, because she's 13, not a baby. And I was going into Boston to hang out with some friends of mine for like restaurant week or something. And I was like the worst friend ever, because I was completely obsessed with this idea. And I was like writing it on my phone and like totally distracted by this idea. There was one scene in a restaurant where scene meaning I made a scene accidentally, or my friend asked me a question. I was so absorbed that I like was so surprised someone was talking to me. I actually spit my water out all over the table, and like it was ridiculous. And we're like this like fancy dinner play. I was ridiculous. But I actually wrote, when I was in that car, I actually wrote the full first page of the book on my phone. Do not try this at home. I was in fact parked on the highway. And it actually hasn't really changed since. We added one line at the end of it, and the rest of it is the very same. But every other line in Monstrous, or every other page in Monstrous, have been like edited to the inch of his life. Aside from that. So I was totally in love with this story. And when I finally did get home, stopped being a bad friend and got home, I stayed up writing the first chapter and started plotting this. And I was just totally obsessed with the story. And I often have a hard time drafting quickly, unless it's NaNoWriMo, and that like lights a fire under me that nothing else can. I don't know why. Maybe it's my competitive feelings or something, but it was not NaNoWriMo time. So, but I ended up actually writing this book in a month and a half, which was so quick for me. And it was like words were just pouring out my ears, and I just loved my little monster girl. And my critique partners kind of got wind of what I was working on, like, oh, when can we read this? I'm like, it's not ready yet. It's not ready. No one's gonna like this like I do. And it took me a long time of like tinkering obsessively with the story before I sent to my critique partners. And then when they sent it back, like, oh, you have to query this. I'm like, no. This is my for fun, for me book. I'm not going to send this out. No one's going to want my monster girl. This is like way too weird. And eventually they did convince me to, in fact, try querying this story. And turns out weird is what I needed. Like, apparently my other ones weren't weird enough, I guess. And I actually ended up getting off.
Cyborg on prom night sounded a little weird.
It was so much fun. Seriously, like someday I'm going to rewrite that book too. Like I have this list of like books I'm going to rewrite because I love the idea.
Well, now we started on a podcast. There are 3 different versions being written as we speak.
But that's the great thing about an idea is like everyone has their own spin on it. So no one else will be quite like mine. So I queried Monstrous finally, and I got 3 offers of representation, which shocked me like crazy because I was like, people actually want to read this. This is cool. And I had the tables had kind of turned where I had to actually pass on with 2 of those agents, which was like mind-boggling to have to do. Also terrible. Like there's nothing worse than having to say no to somebody who wants to work with you, is excited like about your book. Like that really stinks. Gave me a whole new appreciation for agents having to reject writers. But anyway, I signed my agent, Susie. She's amazing. She's been my agent ever since. And she then turned around and sold my book in 8 days to HarperCollins. So it was like, yay, after 4 years of no, we get a couple of really nice yeses, which is great. So that's how my first book got published. And actually, fun fact, Monstrous, we initially, I was querying it and I wrote it thinking it was a young adult book. And my editor at Harper actually bought it as a middle grade book. And which was an interesting conversation because my agent sent me the offer. She's like, so she wants it to be a middle grade. And I'm like, middle grade? Hadn't really thought about that very much. How would that work? But as it turned out, she's brilliant and was absolutely right. It just required part at the end to be aged down, essentially. And like it was like in the last third of the book. And the book was also much shorter then. Now it's much longer. So that would be the last half of the book, but then it was last third. And then it really was, in fact, a middle grade book. So, and I've been writing middle grade pretty much ever since until Twin Daggers, which is finally getting published. So my first YA.
And my audience loves literary agents. What was Susie's last name?
Oh, Susie Townsend.
Oh, okay, sure.
She's at New Leaf. She's awesome. She's the best.
I met Susie Townsend in person, and she's been featured at. You could read her 7-question interview now, esteemed audience, at middlegradeninja.com. Everything you'd ever want to know.
Susie's amazing. Highly recommend. She's awesome. She's a fantastic agent. She's a delight to work with.
I will send her us talking about what a delight she is, and then I will invite her to come on the show, and that'll be that'll be the plan. Okay. We'll touch on some of your publishing journeys some more, but first we should get back to Twin Daggers, available August 25th, available for pre-order right now. So why, after a successful string of middle grade novels, creepy, weird middle grade is the brand? Why now is young adult the move?
So it's funny because I kind of fell into middle grade with that first book, with my editor buying it as middle grade, whereas before that I always thought of myself as a young adult writer. And it just kind of turned out that these ideas I had, a lot of them were really well suited for middle grade. And I really enjoyed writing that sort of like weird, creepy, I call them like my weird, creepy girls, except for the Star Shepherd, which is a weird, creepy boy, which was written with Dan Herring, who's an artist, which I have that cover here too. I'm just going to show it because it's so pretty. It's so shiny. It's foil. I love it. That one's That one came out a year ago, and it's so great. And Dan is the co-author. We wrote it together, and he also does illustrations. There's a bunch of illustrations in the book, and he did the cover, and it was really cool. Anyway, so I call my weird, creepy girls. But I've been working on young adult books all along, and I actually started working on Twin Daggers in 2012, which was around the time that I first got an agent for Monstrous, and Monstrous got a book deal. So I've been working on this book for a really long time. And then I had to write the sequel in like 6 months, which is like, publishing is so weird. It really is. But this is my in-between contracts book, and like that book where I'm like, I love tinkering with this, and I love these characters, and I love their story, and I really hope it gets out there eventually. And I have other young adult stories, and I'm working on too, like a couple sci-fi things, and a couple other fantasy ideas too. Right now, I happen to have, a really great relationship with Source Books, who does my middle grade, from Shadow Weaver onward, and so they've been really great, really supportive, and they keep buying my books, so I'm delighted to keep writing. But hopefully, the young adult book will do well, and I'll keep buying those as well, because I love writing those as well. It's writing for kids, regardless of the age category. It's such an honor and a privilege. Like, kids are so great, and like I said before, books were such a formative and important thing for me, and they still are, but they especially were when I was growing up. The being able to write for other kids it's really a pretty cool thing. So, maybe I'll have a picture book someday if I figure that out.
I think that's the hardest of the kids' lit genres. I think that one's impossible.
Yeah, I have an idea, but I think it's too weird. We'll see.
Tell me you want a 500,000 word saga about teens. I'm your man. I got it. But
yeah.
Picture book, ooh, I don't know about that.
Yeah, when they say every word counts, they mean it. They really do. Like, I tend to write long. Like, Monstrous is a middle grade book. It's 105,000 words. It's a beast.
So how did you get away with that as a debut author? Because that is incredibly...
I don't know. Honestly,
you said it to the editor, and they wanted to make it middle grade, and it ended up being longer. So how long was it when you said it to him to begin with?
Well, it's funny. When we sent it to him, I think we sent my editor, it was like 75,000 words, because we've been pitching it as young adult, which for young adult, that's totally reasonable. Short, even, for young adult fantasy. And then she wanted me to age down this one plot issue in the last part of the book. And to do that, I ended up adding this really cool thing, which I'm not going to say because it's a spoiler. And it ended up spending a lot more time in the Monstrous. They spent a lot of time in this one city, Briar, and then eventually they ended up going to a different city, and they spent a lot more time now in that other city because of this additional fun things. So the book really lived up to its name it just kept growing and growing and growing. And while I should mention my edit letter for this book. Oh, I should have brought that down. I didn't. I bring it for school visits, and it's fantastic. It's 20 single-spaced pages. Welcome to publishing, MarcyKate. I nearly had a panic attack when I first got that. However, it was brilliant, and thankfully my editor was very nice and understanding that it was in fact very long. And at the very beginning of the letter, she had this paragraph of like, I realize this is very long, but I think you're an amazing writer. You can totally do this. Rah, rah. Call me anytime if you need moral support. So I had it like highlighted and like taped to my computer and read it over and over. But also while I was writing Monstrous, in order to fill in a lot of things, a lot of what they wanted was more development of the characters and the backstory and things like that. So they kept asking for more. So I gave more. They certainly got it. And one thing that I ended up doing was writing a prequel novella because Chimera, the main character, she wakes up reborn, doesn't have a lot of memories. So I wrote a prequel novella about her life before during this time. So like a 3-month period of revising, writing this prequel novella, and doing this beast of an edit letter. And so I basically added like between the prequel novella and the additional words, like I wrote like 50,000 words one summer, which is not normal for me. But I loved the story, so it worked. And the prequel novella actually is published in the back of Ravenous. It's called Precious. But you wouldn't want to read it until after you read Monstrous because it's kind of a spoiler. But But yeah, so it took a while to get there, but yeah, it's a beast. And then funny thing, when we came time to write Ravenous, my editor, we had a little conversation like, you need to keep this a little shorter. Which I was like, yes, I will make it shorter. So Ravenous is more like 75,000 words, but then they published a 25,000 word prequel novella on the back of it. So they're actually the same size. It's not actually shorter at the end, but it's okay. So funny thing, publishing is funny like that. But the rest of my
just that Monstrous was doing well, and they didn't want kids to feel like they were getting less this time around. You think?
Maybe I don't know.
I've done good in my head. I don't know. There's
sounds great to me.
Publishing is a fool's errand. I apologize.
The rest of my middle grade though has been shorter, generally speaking. So I've kind of figured out how to plot it a little better and keep it a little less epic. It was so more like creepy and fun and not quite as like epic fantasy as Monstrous probably is. So
now we're talking Twin Daggers, available August 25th. What does the freedom of the YA what has that opened up for you? I assume more violence.
Yes, there is more violence in this book. Absolutely. They're called Daggers. Also more romance, which is nice. Because you can have a little bit of romance in middle grade. And I would never say you can't do something in middle grade. I heard some people say you can't have anybody die in middle grade, and in Monstrous there's like literally 12 deaths. So some people die more than once. It happens. But in young adult,
$1 for every time I heard somebody tell me the thing you can't do in middle grade, I would have many dollars.
I seriously it'd be wealthy. So like you can have romance in middle grade, of course, but it's not normally the focus. Usually, obviously, there's plenty of exceptions, but for Twin Daggers, it was kind of freeing to be able to like put in more of the romance and that teen angst. So kind of one thing that I also kind of got me into writing and thinking about writing was Twilight. I will admit I enjoyed Twilight. It was fun. I related to it. I was a very angsty teenager. So I totally related to like that yearning and that angsty, yearning for the kind of a thing was like, I totally related. And there's plenty of other issues of Twilight, but that really resonated with me even as like my late 20s when I first started writing and I was married. It just like, oh, I remember that feeling. And so trying to like recreate that, and that's like put myself back in those shoes, but not having to actually be in high school was kind of fun. With a much more like
Twilight I knew at the time, I think was 36, 37.
Yeah, really. And there's nothing to be ashamed of. It's a compelling story. There's certainly plenty of ways you can dissect it that can have issues, but there's that sort of raw emotion that I think really, really tapped into something with a lot of people. I know it did for me. And so I really liked being able to kind of have that romance and have it play out with my angsty teens. And the main character, Asa, she's fun. She was fun because like she's confident, she has these magical powers, and she knows she's good at what she does. She knows she's a good spy. She knows she's fooling all these people who she's going to school with. They have no idea that she's like trying to take them all down and destroy their city. And she's a little overconfident. But when it comes to like romance, she has no idea what she's doing. And it's like she goes into this assuming she will be able to, be that. She doesn't know about Juliet, but like she has that Juliet kind of archetype of like the two warring factions. And so she goes into this thinking, oh, I can use these people. I can use this guy for information, and it ends up not quite happening the way that she thought. She doesn't know how to handle like these emotions that she's not supposed to feel for the technocrats, who are the technologically minded faction. And she ends up learning a lot about them, that they're maybe not as bad as she thought, though some are really, really, really horrible. But things are not necessarily always what she thought. And it was really fun to be able to do that and play with the idea of Romeo and Juliet. And I always loved Shakespeare too, so that was always like fun to be able to do that. Hamlet's been a running theme in my life, so someday I have to do a Hamlet retelling, but that's a little bit of a depressing ending because everybody dies. So Romeo and Juliet, again, everybody's supposed to die, but there's a sequel, so You'll just have to read the sequel to see how that turns out. But the whole point was kind of to turn on its head and taking the idea of Juliet as someone who has more agency. And because I think that was one thing that always kind of bothered me about Romeo and Juliet is like, she's kind of just like going with it. And she's like, yeah, I totally love this dude. And now I'm going to like kill myself over it. But didn't have a lot of, she made some choices, but she didn't have a lot of like agency and not a lot to do other than kind of like hanging out in her room and like talking to her nurse until she's on the run. And
which, to be fair, in Shakespeare's time would have been almost revolutionary for a female character.
Absolutely. Right? Absolutely. And that, for that time frame, totally. Absolutely. Not necessarily for this one. Though I guess, you know, in COVID time, I guess hanging out in your room and talking to a nurse is actually...
we all have that amount of agency.
Maybe we're backtracking now. But trying to give her more of like the decision-making and driving the story a lot more was something I kind of wanted to do and make her more of a powerful character and more of a driven character than one that kind of feels like she's just being swept along by these forces. Because there's a lot of talk in Shakespeare about forces of love are sweeping you along, and the main character Asa is totally blindsided by those forces too, but she has her own sort of attempt to counteract them anyway. And it was just a fun world to play around in as well. You can get a little deeper into world building in YA too, where you can provide a little bit more detail and a little bit more of kind of the nitty gritty type things, which I always loved when I was reading fantasy. I grew up on like Terry Brooks and Tolkien and stuff like that. Where like it's not like Tolkien, where like I could never get to the Silmarillion because it was just, I tried reading it and it was like just all this backstory and backstory and backstory, and I was just, it was almost like reading the Bible, like he begat so and so. It was just ridiculous. And but you can
seriously feed off fans of this show by asserting that I am not a big fan of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Well, there's more hate mail just for me. But it's boring. They walk around, they sing songs, they eat lunch. It was probably revolutionary at the time, but I've read more exciting stuff since.
I enjoyed it. But there's much faster paced books you can read now, I guess is the point. But still, the fun thing for YA is that you can get more of a robust world.
What's something that a pretty detail that you're getting away with, that you're able to explore more? What's a good example of something you can do more you couldn't do in middle grade?
I think going into more of like the history of the factions is one of the things that I did a lot of, especially toward the end when you find out some things are not what you think, because you gotta love twists. And there's more history that you can delve into, whereas, you know, and there is history to a degree in some middle grade books, more so in Monstrous, I would say, than the other ones. But it can delve more deeply into like the history of the people who they were back then and their motivations and what they were doing, as how it relates to the present, obviously, not just randomly for fun having it there as filler, obviously, but there's more of that. You can get more into that like meaty backstory and how that influences the current times, and the impact, sort of like the ripples of what that has had for the current times. And that's one thing actually my main character thinks about a lot is the ripples, how every little action that she does impacts everything else, and that she's a very cautious spy, whereas her twin is a little bit more like having fun spying, not quite as cautious as Asa is. That causes a little bit of tension between them. But that was fun. But also, like you mentioned before, there is some violence in it because they're fighting. There's some fight scenes. There's one of my favorite scenes. It's not a spoiler. Which I look forward to. Where I could not have done this in a middle grade book. Where Asa, because she's so confident, she's, you know, thinks about how she has this magic. She could, you know, just cast a spell without somebody knowing and just basically grasp their heart in her hand without even touching them and kill them silently. They never know if she wanted to kill any of these people that she's around. And kind of like murderous thoughts because she's just been bred to hate these people. And when it comes time that she actually does end up having to kill somebody, it is nothing like what she thought. because it can't be, of course, because she has to be taken down a little bit of a peg before she can, grow. But she ends up killing this person in a very kind of bloody way, because it was not what she expected at all. She expected to be just easy, bloodless, simple. No, not remotely. And her love interest ends up finding her and basically cleans the blood off her hands and face, and then helps her hide the bodies. And true love. Yes. They help you to hide the bodies. Couldn't do that in middle grade.
That's a great date idea for those of you struggling to find something to do together.
Yeah, totally. Quarantine dates, do not recommend.
Well, if you're going to go out and commit homicide, for the love of God, wear a mask. Protect
Seriously. Yourself. Exactly. Right? She did not do that. They were just covered in blood. It was terrible. So, yeah. Not good.
So when you're, I'm curious about this almost theme through your life, because you're reading Shakespeare at way too young an age. Then you're repurposing Shakespeare for the great opera. And now you're retelling Romeo and Juliet as this lifelong journey of a Shakespeare fan. Without spoiling, is the hardcore fan and you feel dedicated to stick to the text? Do you want a one-to-one character? Here's the nurse character. Is it a priest, monk, the dude with the poison?
Yeah.
Friar, some kind of
Friar. Yeah,
it's been a minute. Do you feel that pressure to do a one-to-one representation of everything, or are you okay with just more of a general? That's the spirit of my question.
Yeah. So, I like to dabble in both the literal interpretation as well as more thematic, and I've done that through other books too, like Monstrous and Ravenous were retellings of fairy tales, sort of. Like Monstrous was Frankenstein meets the Brothers Grimm, and Ravenous was Hansel and Gretel meets Baba Yaga. But neither of them were faithful to those original narratives. It was very much more of an inspired by type of a twist on those things. But Twin Daggers is more closer to the original, in that it didn't start out that way necessarily. It started out more inspired by, and then eventually realized it was going to become stronger if I made it more grounded in it a bit more. But it started out very much more of a thematic inspiration, with those, the idea of the two warring factions that sort of push and pull, and people are not necessarily what you expect underneath, and that sort of a thing, the star-crossed lovers idea. And then eventually it morphed into, I need to revise this. I forget what number revision, but it was somewhere around 20. It's like, need to add some more bones to this. And went back through Romeo and Juliet and did a little chart of, scenes that are important and things that I wanted to pull into there, and how I could reflect them into the book if they weren't already there, how they tying them together, like what was already there, what was missing and needed some gaps. And also making sure that if there were any themes that I was missing, or like motifs of things, like one motif in particular I kind of wove in a little bit more, and the last one was like that love is really brutal. It can be a brutal, unkind sort of a thing. It's not necessarily the happily ever after and the happy experience. It could be, a brutal, terrible thing to fall in love with somebody. And in Asa, the main character's experience, that's exactly what it is. She's like, oh no, what? Well, this is terrible that I'm starting to have feelings for this guy. What the heck? And it's kind of takes you by surprise. So that was it. I've done both. For this one, it's a little bit more, I'm not going to say rigid, because that's not, it's a loose retelling. But there's definitely the similar archetypes throughout, and there's no like character I would say is specifically the nurse. Though there is one one is kind of like the friar, sort of loosely. But the most important ones really are Romeo and Juliet archetypes for the characters.
So the Shakespeare fans will be both satisfied and pleasantly surprised then.
Exactly. And there's a sequel, which there's not to Romeo and Juliet. So.
Well, not yet.
That's true. I can write another opera.
There you go. This is your time.
Totally.
Shakespeare fans have waited, what, centuries now?
Centuries. Yep. Totally.
So now you're here. Step up to the plate and give us the sequel we needed.
Right. I'll do my best.
So, we're talking pivoting a little bit to fantasy because I know that you teach workshops or have given workshops on creating magic systems. And I was wondering, what kind of a taste can you give us for free? And feel free to use the magic that in Twin Daggers as an example.
Yeah, I did. I did a workshop on that at Goodreads Comic-Con a couple years ago, and let's see. I think the most important thing to remember about magic is that it does have to make sense. I like to joke the thing I like about writing fantasy versus contemporary is that I can just make stuff up for what's somebody different. I just say it's magic. But it does have to make sense. There has to be logic to it. There has to be rules, and you have to obey them or have a really good reason for breaking them that actually makes sense within the scope of your world. And that's not necessarily an easy task. And that's kind of something when I write primarily fantasy. All I've had published so far has been fantasy. And every magic system is a little different. And it always takes some time to go through and think about what are the rules? What is this magic like? Is it an energy? Is it something almost sentient? What is it? How does it come to people? What is its origins? What's the sort of backstory of the magic? And thinking about that and brainstorming a lot of those things. And I kind of have these templates that I'll go through where I'll jot down notes about things. Usually in the beginning stages of plotting. I'm very much a plotter. I love to sit in my writing cave and make things terrible for my characters. So much fun.
You sit down and do a full outline, start to finish, before you get started on the actual writing? Or?
I have a brain vomit, and then I do where I'm in the idea stage, all these random things that could happen that I put in one Word doc, and then I use Blake Snyder's Save the Cat Beat Sheets. And I use that to plot my stories. I wish I'd found them years ago because I think the first time I used it was for Monstrous. And had I used them on those previous 6 books, maybe some of them would have gotten published. My very first book that I mentioned earlier had this 10-page outline with all kinds of meandering tangents going off in all sorts of random fun places that did not actually move the plot forward. Obviously, that's why I did not get published. But now I have a much more streamlined plots using the beat sheets that really help me focus and figure out where all this random sort of brain vomit in the Word document should go. So that's what I use to plot. And then I use Scrivener to write. And I also find that the beat sheets is really helpful for writing a synopsis because you've basically got the bones of it right there. You just kind of got to copy and paste into another Word document and flesh it out a little bit more. And I hate synopses. They're the worst. But having they're so bad. But having the beat sheet there is actually really helpful and does half the work for you, which is great.
Surely at this point, I mean, you're MarcyKate Connolly. If somebody says, "Can I have a synopsis?" just say no. I've written this many
novels. It does not work that way.
Nope.
Does not work that way. Because also,
you have to sell before you get to that point.
Way more than I have. That's for sure. Yeah, not yet. So magic. You have to have some kind of a system for the magic, an actual system. And one of the things that I did when I did this workshop a couple years ago, I've only done it once, but it was so much fun. I would love to do it again. I hope somebody asked me to because I have it on my website of I can give this workshop. It was really fun. Where it kind of went through this whole thing together as a group with the people who are there of building our own magic system. And I had all these templates and questions you ask and things to think about. And I don't have it in front of me, so I can't tell you exactly what all those questions are right now. But things about, like I was saying before, is it an energy? What is it like? What are the rules? Who has it? Why do they have it? Is it a spiritual type of power? Is it a random power? And are there different levels of power? And all sorts of things to go through all this. And what are the consequences of it? What happens when you use the power? Is it limitless, or is there a price? Because there has to be a price for magic of some kind. and lots of things to think about to kind of really flesh this out. And we went through this whole thing, making this whole magic system as a group, and it was really fun. I have terrible handwriting, but I had this like whiteboard and was writing all this of like flipping papers and stuff. It was really fun. It was a lot of fun. So, but you have to have a system for it. It has to make sense, and there's a lot of things you have to think about, especially like the price in particular is an important thing to think about. Or maybe there is no price, and if not, why not? Does that make your power limitless? And lots of fun things to think about.
So what's a common price that you would have to pay for magic?
Blood. Blood's a price. In a lot of fantasy novels, the blood price is the thing you have to do. In others, it's I'll use Monstrous as an example. So in Monstrous and Ravenous, magic is like kind of a living thing in a way. It's not quite sentient, but it's sentient enough that only people who already are magic can handle it. And there's an evil wizard in the book that nobody can kill because he's the last wizard. And if you kill a wizard, the magic will try to go into the user, the other person who killed them. Basically, whoever conquers the person with the magic, they'll want to go into that person because they think it's more powerful. But it will just consume them in flames because it'll just totally burn them up if they don't have magic already in them. So that's kind of this sort of a price of the magic is you can take on more and more and more if you already have magic. But if you don't, it will literally kill you because you cannot handle the magic. Whereas sometimes there's less obvious prices. For example, in my book, Shadow Weaver, I'll show the lovely cover here. It's about a girl who can talk to her shadow, and her shadow can talk back, essentially. But she also has the magical power of shadow weaving, which means she can actually create things from the shadows. She can craft things from the shadows. And using her magic doesn't necessarily take a physical toll on her, but her magic is kind of weird and creepy, and it takes a toll in sort of the price of her family, where her family thinks she's kind of weird. She wants to play and talk to her shadow all day instead of like people, and she gets kind of ostracized. So there's different types of prices that you could have. In Twin Daggers, the price is more, it's a physically exhausting thing. Their magic actually resides in their blood, and so they have to basically hone it like a muscle. So they have to practice, and they train all the time. They train with like running and using magic and casting spells at the same time. Because if they don't, they could be caught off guard, and they could be, out of breath, and they can't sing the words of the incantations. They can't cast a spell to defend themselves. So it's much more of a physical thing and physical toll in Twin Daggers than some of my other books.
So can they be like a video game? Oh, my meter's almost depleted. Let me grab a pellet or something, whatever.
No, you wouldn't be able to really grab a pellet, but like you'd have to like, it's kind of like you wouldn't like run a marathon without working up to it. So the twins in the book become stronger because they've worked at honing their magic and honing their skill, their spell casting, as well as their physicality of like training and running and fighting and all these other things while using magic as well.
So if there was no price, if we just did, I don't know, a Superman character, but we took away the kryptonite, just like all the power all the time. This is a facetious question, but what would the story problem for you, the writer, arise as a result of that decision?
It would be boring, because if they have limitless power, they can do anything. They can solve any problem. So that's also part of why you need limits on magic in some way, shape, or form, is you need conflict. And if they can solve everything with a snap of their fingers, you have no conflict and you have no story.
There you go. Straightforward, to the point. Beautiful.
That was the shortest answer I've given you yet. Sorry, I'm long-winded. In case you're wondering why some of my books are long. So.
Not at all. We like long on this show. My audience, they live for it.
Oh, good.
They want to hear everything that you got to share.
I'm on the right podcast.
Written so many fantasy novels. Have you decided if a genie shows up, whatever? Will Smith appears in blue and says, "I will give you one of the powers you've written about." What power would you want for yourself?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I'd probably want Asa's magic, because it can impact more things and it's more versatile than some of my other magics. Like the magic in like Shadow Weaver, in that world, it's specific things like shadow weaving or light singing, or green growing. That kind of a thing is very specific. Whereas in Twin Daggers, the Magi faction, they can basically use their magic on anything in any kind of organic matter, anything that is alive. Except Asa and Xandria, not a spoiler because they tells you in the first like couple pages, they are special because they can actually use their magic on the machines as well. So they can use their magic on anything. So it almost appears like their magic could be limitless, but it's not. There are ramifications and restrictions on that as well too, but that you find out later. No spoilers.
Yeah, but if you were going to give it to yourself, you're not worried about the conflict.
Totally limitless.
No restrictions.
I'm happy to be boring and have tons of magic. That would be great. That would be fantastic.
People come around like, your story is kind of tedious to me. Oh, that's your problem. I'm great.
Like, I'm fine with that. Like, my toddler used to go to sleep. Boom, you're asleep. You nap for 3 hours because I have cast that napping spell on you so I can write. That'd be great.
Oh, I just got a great idea. Another hour.
Yep. Keep sleeping. Sleep is good for you. It's fine.
Forget magic. If I could just get my child to have a snooze button, oh my god.
Oh my god. That would be amazing. I love him to pieces, but oh my god, that would be amazing.
Well, I've heard that you're a Scrivener evangelist, and we briefly touched on it there, but I want to give you the platform to all the writers listening. What are the benefits to Scrivener? How do you employ it?
Okay, Scrivener is amazing. I mean, how much longer do we have?
As long as you need. Although we're going to talk ghosts. I haven't forgotten, esteemed audience. We'll get there. But Scrivener. Okay.
So Scrivener. That's right. I forgot the ghost thing. I love Scrivener. I do call myself a Scrivener evangelist. I teach workshops on this. I've done a couple of SCBWI conferences that have been like 2-hour workshops. I also taught one that was like a full day, 6-hour mega workshop, which is so much fun. I didn't start using Scrivener until like 2010, I think was the first time I used it. And I've been writing for a couple years before that, and it changed my life. I know that sounds dramatic, but it's so true. Between that and the beat sheets, it's been like absolutely life-changing. When I first wrote my very first book, I wrote each chapter in a separate Word document because I wanted to be able to move things around. And that's what worked for my brain. And I ended up losing a couple of chapters that way and misplacing them because it's not very conducive to writing a whole book that way. Scrivener lets you put each chapter in its own little scrivening, is what they're called, little text files within this whole Scrivener document. You can move them around, you can drag and drop. You can much more easily see the whole scope of what you're working on from like a 50,000 foot view. Whereas in Word, like, it's so difficult because if you got like a 300-page Word document, you're scrolling for days to figure out where, like, where did this part reappear and all of that. It can be really difficult. And Word is great, it has its uses, plenty of good uses, but Scrivener allows you to see this 50,000 foot view. That's one of the many benefits. I know a lot of people will open it up and be like, oh my God, this is too much, and close it immediately. Totally understand. If you're not technologically inclined, it can seem totally overwhelming at first. But it seems overwhelming because it has so many features. And it has these features because different people learn and work in different ways because their brain operates in different ways. Some people are more visual learners or visual thinkers, and some people are more linear, and other people are text-driven or just want to, like, they're pantsers, they just want to go forth and write. And Scrivener actually caters to all of those. They have a corkboard where you can add note cards and move them around however you want for plotting. They then also have an outliner section where if you're more of a plotter like I am, you can put in your outline and see how that fits together and move that around too. And if you're a pantser and you just want to go forth and write, they have just the writing document section too. And the cool thing is all of those things feed into each other. So if you are doing things on your note cards, that automatically feeds into that outline and into the document portion as well. And so it's all connected. It's all interconnected and just, it's so cool. So, but the thing is,
like auto-populating, or?
Yeah, it's all the same. It's all like that note card is, you can still see it in this little sidebar called an inspector as you're writing your document. And you can put other things there, like you put notes that pertain either to the entire project. So when you're scrolling through the project, you can see these notes on the sideline there, wherever you are in the project. Or there's some that are document specific. So you only see these notes as it pertains to this chapter. And you'll see the next one's the next chapter when you go to that one, which is really helpful for revisions. And I use it, it's the best thing ever for revisions. It really is. But it caters to those different ways of looking at things. And a lot of people will tell me, I use Scrivener, but I don't think I use it very well because I don't use all the features. And like, that's okay. I don't know anybody who uses all the features of Scrivener. Like, it would drive you nuts because there's so many features specifically because people think in different ways. And it's like, it's totally okay. If you're like, I feel guilty, like, don't feel guilty. You don't have to use them all. They have these things you can do so you can create your own writing, your perfect writing environment and use these features whatever way works for you and whichever features work for you. And the rest you can just ignore because it's not like you're being forced to use them. They are there as a resource if you need them. And if you don't, that's okay. No one's going to be like, you need to use the note cards. Personally, I never use the note cards. I'm just not a visual thinker in that way. I find them kind of useless. I know lots of people who swear by them. Whereas I like to use the inspector, which has the document notes for revision, as well as you can do like color coding things. There's keywords where you can like assign keywords to each little chapter or scene. And I use that a lot in my last revision because I had a lot of like running themes and things that need to be addressed. So in my read through, I was like, oh, I'm going to flag this with this keyword and this keyword so that you can search by the keyword and just see all the chapters pertaining only to that particular plot thread. So you just go through and revise that plot thread in those scenes and not have to like read through 50 other pages to get there. I could wax
how will I
about
find
this
all
like
the random things that can be made better in the 50 pages? I'm on my way to get there.
Well, you'll also obviously need to read your entire book at some point and tie things in, of course. But if you're like, what I was doing was I was reading through and flagging things, and I was like, I should be working on this, adding this in here, and so I'm flagging this as, you know, this Romeo and Juliet theme or something, or this sister relationship theme that needs to be fixed here or teased out in different ways. And it can be really helpful. I love Scrivener. I swear by it. I have this like 20-page document of walkthroughs and stuff for my workshop, and like it's great. If anybody, the audience, if anybody sees me on Twitter or Facebook, feel free to ask me a Scrivener question. I'm happy to help. I'll give you advice if I can. It's so great. It's just, I love it. It's been this immensely helpful for me in figuring out how to write faster and in a more organized fashion. Whereas I was not remotely organized before, and I did not write very fast. But now that I'm under deadlines and such, like I have no choice. So I'm very grateful to have this particular tool. Also, they are not paying me to say any of these things.
They should be.
I know.
I should be hired as
right?
a spokesperson.
I do not get any kickbacks for this.
Send this woman free stuff for the love of God. Send me free stuff.
Right. I love the software. I'm happy to help. And like, if anybody has any questions, reach out on Twitter or Facebook or whatever, and I'm happy to give you tips.
Well, this is something that this is just a personal question, but I think it'll be beneficial for a esteemed audience also. Because before we started recording, you were telling me that you've just written 2 drafts of novels within about 6 months.
Yes.
And how have you gone from a slower writer to a faster writer? Is it all Scrivener, or what other tips would you have for speeding up?
So, could use a few tips myself. It's mostly getting your butt in a chair and doing it. And I actually have a standing treadmill desk that I use, a walking treadmill desk, which I also find very helpful to get like the blood flowing versus sitting personally. But that's not something most people can afford. Thankfully I was able to use part of my advance to buy. I had to invest in that once I started working from home as well. It was hard. I'm going to be honest with you. It was a really rough year, and 6 months writing 2 drafts of 2 sequels. I had the sequel to Hollow Dolls I had to draft. It's called Lost Island, and that took me about 3 months, and it was much shorter than the Twin Daggers sequel, which is called Heartless Heirs. And sometimes drafting is really hard for me. It's like pulling taffy from my brain. I hate drafting. Revision is so much more fun. I love revision. But it was kind of a slog for the first book. And then I got through it and realized I need to write the sequel to Twin Daggers, and I have like 3.5 months to do it. And that was really hard. I think I got a deadline extension by like a month at some point, I think. I'd have to look at my notes, but I'm pretty sure I did get a deadline.
There's a global pandemic. Sure, take a month.
It was before the pandemic. That was from like June to January-ish, and then I've been revising them for editing process. So the editing process is a little separate than the drafting. Editing is so much more fun. Also can take a long time if it's complex, but the drafting process is the worst for me. Lucky for me, though, when I was writing the Heartless Heirs, the sequel to Twin Daggers, NaNoWriMo happened to be then. And I don't know, it's clearly completely a psychological thing, but NaNoWriMo, I can fast draft in NaNoWriMo. I can't do it any other time of the year like I can NaNoWriMo, but I have written books in 50,000 words in 10 days, multiple times. It's terrible, 50,000 words, but it's on the page, and then I can revise it and make it better. And I was able to use that month. Wasn't quite that fast, but I was able to write the 50,000 words and a little more, which was great because the book is like 105,000 words now. And I had to get words on the page so I could revise them and make it better. And, I did the best that I could to get it in as best shape as I can. But thank goodness for editors because, even though I handed it in and it was in a book-like form, it's like, I know that I'm going to be able to make this better in the revision process. And pretty excited about how it came together in the revision process. My editor is awesome. Had some really great notes and really great to work with. It's a good team there at Blink YA. And hopefully people will like the first book and the sequel. We'll see. So, but it took a long time. So yeah, I've been under deadline for about a year. I think I had a couple weeks in April.
Now, or are you about to enter another deadline?
Well, I mean, I'm going to have other deadlines. There's more editing to do. I'm sure there's going to be another revision pass of developmental edits on the Heartless Heirs book at some point. And then there'll be, copy edits and first pass pages. There's different levels of editing that'll go on that get to the more minutia. They're not quite as stressful usually as the developmental edits, which are like the big picture and like often require a lot of additional work and additional chapters and a lot of rethinking things. It's more, the fine tuning is more freeing, though also humbling because man, copy edits, there's always something I had to swear off commas every time I get copy edits. Like, I clearly don't know how to use them. I thought I knew how to use commas. And every time it's like, nope, I actually don't. Wrong again. And we're like 9 books in and commas. They always get me.
Way to alienate half the audience. Oxford comma, yes or no?
Oxford comma, all the way.
Me too.
I'm sorry. The other one just causes so much confusion. It's silly. I hate it. Like at my day job, there's some educational writing. I work at for a literacy nonprofit. I'm the marketing director, so I put out our copy. So whenever I see something that's not an Oxford comma, I add the Oxford commas. There's much more Oxford commas in their website and marketing copy than there ever was before.
What kind of time are you able to put in for writing to get the two? What does your day look like with a 3-year-old, a day job, and you're at home dealing with, I assume occasionally you read the news in despair for at least a little bit each day, then get on with it.
Staring into the pit of despair. That's always on the schedule. It's kind of a loosey-goosey schedule because like I said, I do have a day job. And I have to actually do that during the week. And I have this toddler who's home and not at daycare right now. Hopefully in a couple weeks he's going back to daycare. Fingers crossed we don't see a spike in cases here. We're in Massachusetts, so like they're doing decently. So that's the plan, and that will help. But right now it's kind of like every free moment I get, I work in some emails for work, and I play with my toddler, and then I sit in front of the TV, and I do some more work. And he's watched so much TV over the last few months. It's like, I feel like the worst mom ever, but it's been necessary evil. My husband works from home too, and like, that's what we got to do. We can't not pay our bills, So toddler has to eat, and he eats a lot. All those Cheerios. And then when he finally naps, Then I scramble to get some writing in, and that's usually I try to write that, or unless I have like a work meeting or something, because they know that I'll be hopefully uninterrupted. The thing that kind of stinks is when we first started this whole quarantine thing back in like March, he was napping for like 2 to 3 hours usually every day. Now I'm lucky if I get an hour, I am lucky.
Sorry to
So
hear that.
it's all the time. Drives me crazy. Like, buddy, you're up way too early. He's like, I don't want to go to bed. I want you to. Like, I love you so much, but I want you to sleep. So yeah, but it's kind of a haphazard. I do an awful lot of my work at night because I have to. That's like I'm, full-time momming and writing and trying to write and trying to work, and I'm really fortunate that my work schedule was already from home, so they're very flexible, which is good. But I do have deadlines for that have to be met, obviously, too. So it's been a juggling act, and lots of balls have been dropped because it's kind of the nature of the beast. Thankfully, I'm not the only one dropping the balls, so people are pretty understanding about that. So, but yeah, it's before COVID. Things were a little better. I could he would go to daycare. I would work for a few hours, then I'd write a little bit, then I'd work some more, then I'd write at night. And after he went to bed, it was a little bit more of a real schedule. But thankfully, the drafting phase, those 2 drafts, he was in daycare. So just revisions, all hell is broken loose. So.
You get bonus points, just so esteemed reader doesn't think I'm rudely bringing this up apropos of nothing. You wrote a blog post on it, so I assume this is fair game. You turned 40
Yes.
during the pandemic, so that's just extra existential dilemma for you.
It's so funny you bring that up because age is such a funny thing. Like, I don't feel like I'm 40, and whatever. I don't care about age. Whatever, it's fine. But I was on tour with a Star Shepherd with my co-author last September, and I will never forget one of the questions these kids asked in the school visit. My co-author is a year older than me, and the kids asked us how old we were, and he said his age first, and he's like, MarcyKate doesn't say her age doesn't want to. I'm like, whatever, like I'm 39, so I was 39 at the time, and nobody reacted to his age. But when I said 39, the kids were like, oh. Like these gasps of horror. I'm like, what? Like, I'm younger than him, my co-author. Why is that horrifying? It was a very strange reaction. But it was very noticeable. Like the entire class of 200 students was just like, oh, like okay. That was like, I don't know if that's you're surprised I'm 39, that's old, or I'm younger than you thought. I have no idea. I don't know. It was very odd. But anyway, I turned 40, so it was kind of random chill birthday. I'm an introvert, so I've kind of been training for this my entire life. So it was, I made myself my own cake is what I usually do. It's all good. It's fine. I have my husband and my son, so.
That's all you need, really.
Exactly. My favorite people.
No, we're about in the same boat. I managed to get my 40 in just before the pandemic. So
lucky you.
My existential crises I've been able to take them one at a time. So that's been nice. But yeah, nope. It's just my wife and my kid, and we're getting it done here at home as well. And
yep.
So far so good. Knock on wood. Okay, well, enough delays. Esteemed audience, I made a promise to them, and I try never to let esteemed audience down. So we'll start with, I always ask about flying saucers, and you said you were out in the backyard with your binoculars, keeping an eye out for them.
Yes. So I believe that I did, and I was with my neighbor across the yard and her little sister. And we're in her backyard, which is a lot bigger than mine and had fewer trees. And we saw this thing, this globe of light, zigzag across the sky. And it was definitely not a bug. It was up in the sky. And we were totally freaked out. And nobody believed us, which is such a bummer because we lived right near an airport. So we're oh, it's just like a plane. That was not a plane. It totally zigzagged. And nobody believed us, which is such a bummer. But it was a legit UFO. And
So
I
you're
was
an
obsessed.
absolute believer there in our skies.
I think, honestly, like, the universe is enormous. To suggest that humans are the only life in the universe is, like, astoundingly arrogant. Like, of course there's other life. Are they visiting our planet? Who knows? I think it's certainly very possible. If they have more technology than we do, why not? Come see what's going on over here. And probably, that gif of the baby who, like, runs into a room then nopes right out? I think they're probably doing that right now if there's any aliens coming in here. But, that's is what it is.
Of all the questions I ask on this show, I think this is the one that's probably going to age the most badly, because the Pentagon's already confirmed they're in our skies.
They totally are. They had a whole program. Like, there's so much evidence. Like, and I love watching these things. I have this, like, secret project that actually involves aliens, which it has not sold, so I'm not going to talk about it too much. But it's a secret project that involves aliens, and I'm really hoping with the co-author, I'm hoping we get that sold, because it's aliens are near and dear to my heart. That's a weird thing to say, but it's so true.
Well, it makes perfect sense. I mean, you
does.
can only do wizards and spies for so long. You got to have alien stories.
Right? Clearly.
And then, okay. So that's flying saucers covered. Let's pivot back to ghosts. So tell me, this is a haunted. Where was this? You're working a haunted what now?
So I was back in about 10 years ago or so. I was the marketing director of the Palace Theatre in Manchester, New Hampshire, which has had rumors of ghosts for a really long time. It was way back in the day. It was an old vaudeville theater that was refurbished, and for a while it was a cinema, and then it was closed down for a while, and now it's an actual performing arts center. They have a couple of venues in Manchester as well. And I was a marketing director there, and it was supposed to be haunted. I heard ghost stories from a lot of the other staff. Some of the cast had actually, like, seen this lady in figure in white on the stage, and people who would be down in the dressing rooms, which are below the stage, would, late at night on occasion, working on costumes, hear people dancing over their heads, and there was nobody else there. And like creepy stuff like that, like lights going on when they shouldn't, and weird things would happen. I didn't personally have a ghost experience myself, but I will say in addition to being the marketing director, I had just got my arts administration degree, so they were also, like, renting me out as the executive director of the residence opera company. So it was kind of like a 2-for-1. I had 2 hats and 2 offices, and
you were with an opera company and you didn't get them to perform your Hamlet?
No, unfortunately, no. They did professional opera, not random composers. So they would actually, like, bring an audience.
Ooh, self-slam.
I know. It never got performed, and I tried once. I did actually have auditions back in the day after college to get people to, like, audition and, like, put a performance on, and 2 people showed up. So that didn't happen. So maybe someday, like, posthumously, they'll discover my opera and perform it. But anyway, the ghost thing.
Yes.
So it was just this really cool environment, and we once did this, like, kind of a tour beneath the stage, because there's all these, like, kind of secret passageways where you can go through different parts of the stage, this old building, and get to different parts of the building, and it was really cool. But they actually had Ghost Hunters was there once. And hopefully my former boss doesn't watch this thing here. My former boss at the Palace met with the Ghost Hunters, and basically just, like, made up ghost stuff, which was so annoying, because he told us something about, like, the plumbing would go on, which nobody had ever reported. It never happened. And, like, he said it was, like, in this upstairs bathroom, which had never happened. And so one of the guys, apparently Ghost Hunters, was a plumber. So they got, like, totally obsessed with debunking this. And, of course, it never happened. So, like, there was nothing to prove or disprove. And they had this Ghost Hunter thing where they came in to spend the night there. And, like, they were totally focused on the wrong things because our boss just made things up instead of telling them the actual ghost stories people had, which is super annoying. But
set up to miss the
ghost. It was such a waste. It was such a waste. But I know a lot of people who had worked there for years who saw the lady in white, and the actors who'd come through and like saw have like people tap dancing on their heads in the middle of the night. And when I was at the opera company, I was there late at night cleaning up after after the cast, which was like all these people who were from Eastern Europe who didn't speak English, but they know the word pizza. So we'd like be responsible for feeding them. And they would hear like, you'd go backstage and hear like pizza, pizza, pizza. And they would like devour the food because they starve themselves practically to like fit into their costumes and stuff. And when they're on the road, they don't have time to eat either. So it's kind of hard, but they would make this enormous mess. So like 1 a.m. after the opera's done, I would be in there with a garbage bag, cleaning everything up. And like, it was definitely a very creepy vibe. Like I definitely did not feel like I was alone. So like usually they would at least see like one other like house staff member would still be there, but as soon as they're like, hey, we're peacing out for that, I'm like, I'm coming with you. I am not staying down here all alone, like, cause too creepy. So, but it was a really cool place. It was a really cool building, and I think sometimes they do tours still. I'd obviously not right now, but it's a pretty cool place. So,
well, if your former boss is listening, hire somebody to clean up the pizza boxes. Don't make your marketing director do that.
Well, I was the executive director. I was literally the opera company's only employee. So I sold the tickets, I did their marketing, I did the getting donations, and I did the interfacing with the cast and all of that. So like I was a one-man band basically. It was actually a really fun experience. It was one of the most fun jobs I've ever had. So it was just funny that like they knew the word pizza. That was one of the few English words they knew was pizza. So it was really random, but they were really talented and like put on an awesome show. It was actually a really great experience. So.
MarcyKate, I'm looking at the time, and
I
know I've exhausted all of it and flown right through it, but I had a wonderful time doing so, and I so appreciate you making time to be here this evening. This has been a wonderful conversation.
No, this has been really fun. Thank you so much for inviting me to be on. This was a lot of fun.
My last question for you, we'll call it a night. There's always some variation of if there was some bit of advice that you could go back and give to yourself at the start of your writing career or whatever would have been most useful that would have made a big difference for you and might make a big difference for those writers listening. This is my catch-all question. The thing that I wasn't smart enough to get you to say with my questions, this is our opportunity to catch it here at the end. What advice would you go back and give those writers listening?
That's a good question. I think if I could tell myself, I would be like, buy Scrivener, spend the money, and look up Google Beat Sheets. Okay, I would have started there. But I think really the most important advice is not to give up, which sounds like super corny, but it's true. Like, you keep writing. If you love writing, keep doing it. And don't stop because you get discouraged. Keep writing for you and doing it because you love it. Because I know I had that time where I kind of had to decide, am I going to continue doing this? Because this is brutal to get rejections all the time. And, the only really way you can guarantee that you're going to fail is if you quit, if you stop and you give up. And as long as you keep trying, you still have hope that eventually this will pan out and succeed. Because every book that you write, even though it may seem like you're writing book after book that doesn't go anywhere, it's worth it to write those stories because you're learning something with each of those, which I know when you're in the throes of it and the throes of rejection, that's just like, you're going to roll your eyes at that and not want to hear it. Because I was there too, I know. But really though, every one of those books is worth it because you have gone through this, you have written a book, and that is no small thing. That is awesome. It's something to be proud of. And you have learned something from that, and you can take that into your next book, even if that one doesn't pan out. And that's important to remember, even though it's extremely easy to lose sight of and not value as much in the moment when you're being rejected all the time, because rejection really sucks. It's not fun, but you have to figure out how to deal with it.
How do you deal with it? Or did you deal with it? Now it's
well, it's funny. It's funny because all the hundreds of rejections that I got, it really helped me build up a very thick skin. So, when I get negative reviews, it kind of rolls off my back. Like I look at Goodreads, I'll admit, even though for most writers, do not look at Goodreads. Do not do it. It's a terrible idea. I find it interesting because I'm curious to see what people are thinking about the book, and it does not bring me down. Like I'm not just saying that to say, like, it does not bother me. It's like, okay, what's the book for you? that's all right. But like my very first trade review was brutal. And thank goodness for my thick skin. Most of my trade reviews have been very nice. But the one for my very first book, they hated Monstrous. Hated it so much. It was clearly not the right book for that reviewer, or they had a bad day, who knows. But like I found it because thank you Google Alerts, and I actually laughed because it was just so over the top. I was like, wow, not the book for you. Okay. That's okay. But everybody's entitled to their own opinion. And that's the kind of the magic about books, really, is that everyone's going to take your book and read it in a different way and get something different from your book. And maybe what they get from it is that they hate it and it's not the book for them. Hopefully not. Ideally not. But like inevitably, that's going to happen to somebody. Hopefully more of them than not will love your book and think, oh, this is really cool. Or I didn't think of things this way. Or maybe like think about XYZ in a different way than I had before, or they'll find some kind of ray of light or hope in it, ideally. But inevitably, people are not going to like your book, and you've got to wrap your head around it and figure out how to internalize that and not let it eat you up inside.
That is the perfect note to end on. Twin Daggers is available August 25th for pre-order right now as we are speaking. Go get yourself a copy. Check out Monstrous, Hollow Dolls. Get the whole catalog. You'll have a wonderful time. It's quarantine. What do you got to do? This is a perfect time to binge read. MarcyKate, where can esteemed audience find you online, stalk you on Twitter, all that good stuff?
If you can spell my name, you can find me. My website is MarcyKate.com. That is MarcyKate.com. If you're on Twitter, I am at MarcyKate, spelled the same way. On Facebook, it's at MarcyKate Connolly. That's CONNOLLY, just to be difficult. And Instagram is the same as Facebook, MarcyKate Connolly. But happy to say hi. Come say hi. We'll chat about books. It'll be great.
And as always, esteemed audience, find me at middlegradeninja.com. Download your free copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees. Download your free copy of the Book of David, Chapter 1. Go back in the catalog, listen to me read it. You'll have a wonderful time. God willing and I'm alive, I'll see you next week.